Greetings, my children! In the 1990s, the children of that decade had quite a few ghoulish delights. On television, they had Are You Afraid of the Dark? They had disgusting trading cards and video stores that they could secretly use to rent a horror movie. But in books? In books, they had Goosebumps. Reader beware, you're in for a scare.
Goosebumps Graphix are 3 books that adapt several of R.L. Stine's classic kids' horror novellas into sequential art. Today's outing is called Terror Trips, for the theme of traveling to a scary place, and 3 of the Goosebumps books follow that theme perfectly for our purposes, my children.
And just remember, these are for you, my children.
The first is probably the Goosebumps story that has been adapted more times than any other, One Day at Horrorland. Aside from the original book, it was adapted to the TV show, a video game, a sequel book, and of course this comic. A family, along with a friend of the children, travels to a theme park by car, but gets lost along the way. Eventually, they come across a theme park called Horrorland, and not wanting to waste the trip, decide that they'll try out the park at least until they can find a way to get directions. But directions are kind of useless after their car blows up. Naturally, this is a source of concern for everyone, but they still try to make the most of it, the kids going off on their own while the parents try to find a telephone. Remember, while the comic was published in 2007, this is an adaptation of a story from 1994, before cellular phones were prominent for many people. Horrorland has so many wonderful rides and games, like the Doom Slide. While most of the slides have an endpoint, if you're unfortunate enough to pick the Doom Slide, you may never stop sliding again. Or perhaps you'll journey into the Hall of Mirrors, which is less about mirrors and more about the glass walls closing in on you. Horrorland is also surprisingly empty, with plenty of rides that are out of order, and the monsters that run everything may not have your best interests in mind, my children. But don't worry, you can only die once. Next up is an adaptation of A Shocker on Shock Street. The Shocker movies are very popular horror movies with lots of devoted fans and impressive special effects. 2 children, Aaron and Josh, are huge fans of the series, and Aaron's father is even one of the head special effects technicians of the films. The 2 look like they're twins, despite not being related, and you'll notice that in a lot of the artwork for the story, they're drawn as if they're having the same reaction to what is happening, which helps the twist of the story. Anyway, Aaron's father invites the 2 to test out the Shocker Studios tour, which is basically a haunted tramcar ride featuring elements of the films. But after the tramcar breaks down, the 2 begin to wonder if the special effects are just that, or if there are real monsters at play. A Shocker on Shock Street is truly appreciative of monster movies in general, and the people who love spotting references to the works of a horror series. And the great thing is that even after each time the 2 children are frightened by the sights of the tour, they are then quickly excited by what they have beheld and the next attraction before them. The final story is, unfortunately, the weakest because it is not all that terrifying. Deep Trouble is the story of a boy named Billy Deep and his desire to be a great undersea explorer. When he overhears his father being commissioned to locate a mermaid, he goes out to find it himself. And while he encounters sea monsters throughout the story, It is not entirely frightening, especially when he is rescued by a mermaid. He befriends the mermaid and gets caught up in a plot to steal said mermaid and sell her to another institute by murderous crooks. It's really more like Free Willy than a horror story, except with mermaids. Not that the comic does a bad job of adapting it, it's simply that the story doesn't have much going for it. Overall, while Deep Trouble is more fantasy than horror, A Day at Horrorland is probably the most frightening because of how terrifying the rides can be, and A Shocker on Shock Street is phenomenal in its appreciation for those who love monster movies, and the adaptations of the novellas into black and white comics is done superbly.
Goosebumps is still one of the more frightening things for the kiddies. But that's okay, my children, isn't it? After all, you like being scared, don't you?